Babyface Nelson and John Paul Chase ran into an FBI ambush while driving near Barrington, Illinois. Nelson was mortally wounded during the gun battle that ensued. However, he managed to kill agents Samuel Cowley and Herman Ed Hollis, giving John a chance to escape. Alone and friendless in Chicago, he was able to disappear for a time. Authorities and journalists speculated either Alvin Karpis or John Red Hamilton was the second gunman, and John decided to leave town while he had the opportunity. Welcome back. Today we will be telling you the story of John Paul Chase. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Past Crime channel. On December 26, 1901, John Paul Chase was born in San Francisco, California. He dropped out of school to work on a ranch before becoming an assistant machinist in a railroad yard. Chase was fired from the railroad in 1926 and went to work as a chauffeur for a professional gambler in Reno, Nevada. He spent the next few years as a bootlegger in Sausalito, San Rafael, and San Francisco, but he wasn't involved in major crime until his early 1930s association with Babyface Nelson. Little is known about his first meeting with Nelson, but one popular legend has it that Chase was the wheelman in a contract murder Nelson committed in Reno. Crime historians generally agree that Reno was the most likely location where the two first became partners, with Nelson having connections in the local underworld and frequently hiding out there while in Chicago and the rest of the Midwest. On October 23, 1933, he and Nelson robbed their first bank in Brainerd, Minnesota, making off with $32,000 in cash. They picked up a number of other outlaws along the way, including Tommy Carroll and Homer Van Meter. Nelson had joined John Dillinger's gang by March 1934, though Chase did not take part in their first holdup that month in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It is unclear when Chase joined the gang, with some accounts claiming he participated in a robbery in Mason City, Iowa. He spent a lot of time as Nelson's gopher while the gang was in Chicago. Picking up takeout meals, acquiring weapons and ammunition, and relaying messages between Nelson and Dillinger were among his errands. His minor status within the gang may have prevented him from being present at the shootout with the FBI when federal agents raided the Little Bohemia Lodge. Nelson and John Paul Chase fled west to Reno after the Mason City robbery, where their old bosses Bill Graham and Jim McKay were fighting a federal mail fraud case. Years later, the FBI determined that Nelson and Chase kidnapped and murdered Roy Fritsch, the main witness against the pair, on March 22, 1934. Fritsch's quartered body was said to have been thrown down an abandoned mine shaft, though it was never found. Chase's first confirmed Dillinger gang robbery took place on June 30, 1934, when he joined Dillinger, Nelson, Van Meter, and two others in robbing a bank in South Bend, Indiana. This was disappointing given the gang's previous bank robberies, and to make matters worse, a local police officer was killed during their escape. During the next 2 months, the FBI killed Dillinger and Van Meter, and Chase fled to Reno with Nelson. They eventually returned to Chicago, where they stole a car and drove to Wisconsin to stay in one of their safe houses on November 26. When they discovered federal agents staking out their hideout, they returned to Illinois, where they were ambushed by the FBI the next day while driving near Barrington, Illinois. Despite being mortally wounded during the gun battle, Nelson was able to kill agents Samuel Cowley and Herman Ed Hollis before succumbing to his wounds, allowing Chase to flee. Authorities and journalists speculated either Alvin Karpis or John Red Hamilton was the second gunman, and John decided to leave town while he had the opportunity. 4 days later, under the alias Elmer Rockwood, Chase responded to a newspaper ad to transport a car to Seattle, Washington. Helen Nelson gave his name to federal agents while he was on the road, and authorities began actively searching for him for the first time. Chase was arrested on December 27 while working at a state fish hatchery in Mount Shasta, California, and extradited to Chicago. He was the first person charged under a recently passed law that made killing a federal agent a federal crime. Chase was tried and convicted for the murder of Agent Sam Cowley on March 24, 1935, and sentenced to life in prison. On March 31, 1935, he was officially transferred to Alcatraz. Chase had enraged FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who once referred to him as a rat with a patriotic-sounding name for his involvement in the murders of Cowley and Hollis. In 1950, Hoover personally intervened in Chase's first parole hearing, which was denied due to his objection, and ordered the surveillance of the prison chaplain who supported his parole. Watch closely and endeavor to thwart the efforts of this priest who should be attending to his own business instead of attempting to turn loose on society such mad dogs, Hoover wrote in a memorandum to his field agents. John Paul Chase was the first person sent directly to Alcatraz prison, where only Alvin Karpis was there longer than Chase's nearly 20 years. Corrections officer Frank Heaney would later recall in his autobiography, Inside the Walls of Alcatraz, that Father Clark, the prison's Catholic chaplain, first got Chase interested in painting while incarcerated at Alcatraz. During his stay, the prison had an art instructor who came over from San Francisco to teach formal painting techniques. He painted a famous painting of a boat, the J.P. Chase, leaving for San Francisco from the island. He displayed his paintings in prison and small art galleries, and he frequently sold them. Chase was transferred to Leavenworth in September 1954, where his second parole application was denied due to Hoover's efforts. Hoover had announced that he would prosecute Chase for the murder of Hollis were he to be released, but this was vetoed by a federal judge who ruled that a 21-year delay in prosecuting the crime clearly violated Chase's constitutional right to a speedy trial. Chase remained in prison for another decade before being released on parole on October 31, 1966, despite Hoover's protests, and returning to the Bay Area. Chase worked as a custodian at St. Joseph's Seminary in Los Altos, California, until his death from cancer on October 5, 1973, outliving Hoover by 1 year, 5 months, and 3 days.